Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Also, welcome to a brand new episode of Truly Horror, the series where we talk about the true stories, the true events, and true crimes surrounding certain horror movies. The behind the scenes stuff that is often stranger and scarier than the movies themselves. The Exorcist has often been considered one of the greatest horror films ever made, gracing many a list of best scares and most influential movies. Directed by William Friedkin, starring Linda Blair, Ellen Burstyn, Jason Miller, and Max von Sydow, and based on the book by William Blatty, The Exorcist follows Chris MacNeil, a mother deeply worried about the changes in her 12-year-old daughter Regan. Her search for help leaves her torn between science and superstition, as the answers to saving her daughter could be found within the church. Controversy seems to have followed The Exorcist from day one in terms of the content of the story and the production of the film itself. The film has a notorious reputation due to persistent myths and legends surrounding the troubled production, mysterious deaths of people involved, its impact on impressionable viewers, killers in the cast, and decade-long bans in certain countries. This is a film that shocked people on release in 1973, showing audiences a young girl possessed, vomiting, shouting profanities, and acting in a sexualized manner. There were even apparently audience members fainting and vomiting, and there was apparently one woman in the UK who fainted and broke her jaw, resulting in her trying to sue the studio. But the hysteria was only added to and amplified when people began to find out about the tragic tales from the production, and then again in 1977 when one of the cast members committed murder. We recently had the release of The Exorcism, the horror film starring Russell Crowe and directed by Joshua John Miller, the son of actor and playwright Jason Miller, who played Father Karras. The film follows a struggling actor tormented by personal demons, who is starring in a remake of a classic horror film. During filming, all hell breaks loose, providing us with a meta, self-aware take on the supposed cursed set of The Exorcist. But legends and curses aside, what really happened behind the scenes of one of the biggest horror films of all time? The idea of a curse attached to The Exorcist first began during filming. Plenty of things can go wrong while making a film, and an inflated budget, malfunctions, a bout of dysentery, and going over schedule could lead you to believe that the odds were stacked against you. But people went so far as to blame the film for multiple deaths that occurred during and after filming. Actor Jack McGowan, who played film director Burke Dennings in The Exorcist, is tragically died from complications relating to influenza that he caught during a flu epidemic in London in 1973. And Vasiliki Maliaros, who played Karras' mother in The Exorcist, died aged 89. What struck people was that these two actors who died played characters within the film who also died. But I think we can agree that dying of old age and of influenza is very tragic, but it isn't necessarily the work of a curse. There were other numerous deaths surrounding the film, but were mostly family members of people working on the film. Another incident that added to the curse theory was when, a few days into filming, a bird flew into a fuse box and caused a fire on set. It burnt the entire set except for Regan's bedroom. Now, I'll give you that one. That one is a little unusual. So much so that I saw some reports online that after this fire, William Friedkin asked for an exorcism to be performed on the set. Or perhaps it was a blessing, but either way, I could only find a couple of references to that, and even they differed. So take that with a pinch of salt. Curse or no curse, there is no denying that William Friedkin was an unconventional director with some questionable methods, and some of these methods led to multiple cast members receiving serious injuries on set. For the scene where young Regan is visited by Father Karras and thrown back and forth in the bed, to achieve this, Linda Blair was actually stitched into a contraption that was attached to the bed and then remotely controlled by members of the crew. During one take of this shot, the stitching keeping Linda Blair in place came undone, and so while the machine is on, pulling her back and forth, her back was just being hit multiple times, the contraption just slamming into her spine. This resulted in her lower back being fractured. Now, what is disturbing about this is that they apparently didn't send her to the hospital or have her seen by a doctor, and the take when this happened, where Linda Blair is screaming in pain as her back is being fractured, is the actual footage used in the film. A similar incident that happened on set that resulted in injury was in the scene where Reagan slaps her mother Chris and just sends her flying across the room. To achieve this, they strapped Ellen Burstyn into a harness and had a man on the crew pull her back across the room. But when director Friedkin didn't think it looked good enough, he apparently told the crew member to pull harder, which resulted in Ellen Burstyn being injured, again damaging her spine, and again, this is the footage that was used in the film. There are even stories and reports of Friedkin having a gun on set that he would fire without warning in order to get a genuine start or a genuine jump from his actors. When The Exorcist was finally released in theatres, mass hysteria spread through audiences and the media. People apparently found it so scary that there were multiple reports of fainting and vomiting. I found reports online of a church in Rome opposite a cinema showing The Exorcist that was struck by lightning. That in the UK, there were ambulances sat outside cinemas there to help distressed people from the audiences, and there was apparently a woman who broke her jaw after fainting during the film. Some reports say she was from the UK and some say the US, but either way, that's a pretty dramatic cinema experience, and it led the woman to try and sue the studios. Apparently, a legend even began going around that the devil himself was captured within the film cells, and that by projecting the film in cinemas, you ran the risk of summoning the devil. One of the trailers for The Exorcist had to be pulled from screenings because it was causing seizures because of the flashing lights within it. Now, to you or I, that sounds perfectly reasonable, but add it into the rest of the hysteria, and it only fans the flames of fear around the film, but not only the film, but the power that the film had on audiences. Of course, when the studio saw the attention the film was gathering, they really leaned into the reports and even gave a health warning on the film for threat to mental health, claiming The Exorcist may be the most dangerous film ever made in relation to its potential threat to the emotional health of preteens, teenagers, and some adults as well. Alfred Hitchcock had done something very similar a decade earlier with the marketing for Psycho. He had laid out strict instructions to cinemas showing the film and to audience members that weren't allowed in if they had missed the beginning of the film. The studios behind The Exorcist simply used the same approach, creating mystery and fear around the film. Instead of shying away from the claims of a curse, they just fully leaned into it, and it paid off, because The Exorcist is listed as the 6th highest grossing horror film, and if you account for inflation, The Exorcist and Jaws are the 2 highest grossing horror films of all time. The controversy surrounding The Exorcist didn't stop with the cinema release. It continued for decades after some called for the film to be banned, with some representatives from the church claiming the film was, quote, unsuitable for a wide audience, unquote. But the funny thing is, not everyone in the church felt the same way. Some even praised the film in and out of the church, apparently claiming The Exorcist restored the power of faith, and that the ritual of exorcism was in the New Testament. Unfortunately, the negative attention the film received and the reports of damage to health led the British Board of Film Classification to ban a home release of The Exorcist in the UK for around 10 years, from 1989 to 1998. However, the facts behind the ban are not actually as simple as that. The film was released in cinemas and then later on physical media in 1981. At the time, the BBFC didn't have to certify a release, but this changed in 1984, when it was now necessary for previously released films to get a certificate from the BBFC, and The Exorcist in 1988 failed to obtain one. And so, The Exorcist was then banned in the UK until late 1998. Of course, what a supposed cursed film really needs is a shocking story to occur that can help add to the legend and the mythos. And while the following true event, or should I say true crime, certainly fits that description, I'm not sure how widely or well known it actually is. But I'm talking about the story of star of The Exorcist turned real-life murderer Paul Bateson. We've already established that director William Friedkin often had unconventional ways of getting perfect scenes. But the unconventionality aside, Friedkin was a very talented filmmaker and had a strong desire for authenticity in his scenes, especially in his medical ones. In 1972, Friedkin had apparently visited the NYU radiology department and watched the staff perform a cerebral angiograph that he would later have performed on Reagan within the film. A cerebral angiograph is quite an unpleasant procedure that has been mostly abandoned since 1973. It's where a catheter is inserted into the patient's artery to X-ray images of blood vessels in and near the brain. Friedkin was so impressed and decided that to add realism to the procedure in the film, he wanted the actual medical trained staff from NYU to act in the scene, just playing themselves. This included Barton Lane, the lead doctor, and also included Paul Bateson. Now, Paul Bateson worked as a radiological technologist at the New York University Medical Center. And while performing his duties at the hospital, he was, along with many others, asked to participate in the film. Bateson's role was for the most part a very small one, but he does stand out more than the other background members of staff, as he actually has a few lines of dialogue and comforts a distressed Reagan. But this one small role would later become a dark footnote in cinematic history because of Bateson's subsequent crimes. In 1977, 4 years after The Exorcist hit screens, Paul Bateson had lost his job at the NYU Medical Center due to his ongoing battle and struggle with alcoholism. Bateson apparently became a regular on the club scene, and one night while out drinking in the clubs, he met a reporter for Variety named Addison Verrill, and the two spent the night drinking. On the 14th of September, Addison Verrill was found dead in his apartment, with the local police force believing it to be a robbery gone wrong, and the case was considered settled. Not much attention was paid to it, and there was very little media coverage on the case. Fellow reporter Arthur Bell was a well-known writer on gay rights and issues affecting the gay community, and after Addison Verrill's murder, Bell wrote an article for the Village Voice about the case, expressing his outrage and grief over the crime. Then, 8 days after Addison's body had been discovered, Arthur Bell received an anonymous phone call from someone confessing to the murder. The caller detailed the events of that night. He said he had spent the night drinking and taking drugs with Addison Verrill, and the two ended up back at Verrill's apartment where they engaged in sex, and afterwards the caller said he'd become angry and he killed Addison in a drunken rage. Arthur Bell reported the call to the NYPD and discovered that the details the caller had told him were details only the killer should know, as they had been kept from the public. Arthur Bell then received a second phone call, this time giving the name Paul Bateson. This phone call to Arthur Bell was pivotal in the case because it provided crucial information that led to Paul's arrest and conviction. While Paul denied having made the phone call to Arthur Bell and maintained his innocence during the trial, he was convicted and received a minimum sentence of 20 years in prison for the murder. In addition to this, it was suspected that Paul hadn't just killed Addison Verrill, but may have actually killed 6 other men between 1975 and 1977. These crimes were a series of unsolved murders of gay men in New York, dubbed the bag murders, as the victims' bodies had been dismembered and found in bags in the Hudson River. There was one report that Paul Bateson had apparently one night drunkenly confessed to a friend about killing other men, and medical examiners of the bodies had said that the person who cut the bodies was likely either a butcher or had medical knowledge because of the way the cuts were done. However, there was insufficient evidence to attach Paul to the crimes officially, and so he was never charged with them. Paul Bateson served 24 years in prison and then was released on parole on the 25th of August 2003, but there is no record of where he is, what he's doing, or even if he's still alive. What we do know though is that Paul Bateson's crime and speculated involvement in other crimes added notoriety to him and to The Exorcist, as, due to his minor starring role, his name would forever be attached to the film, only adding to the mythos of a curse. So there you have it, guys, the true events and true crimes surrounding the production of The Exorcist. Of course, the idea of the film being cursed is a mixture of clever marketing, people's imagination, and a way to explain all of the strange and tragic events surrounding the film. But the idea of a curse didn't come from nowhere. There were multiple strange occurrences and tragedies and injuries. The production and release of The Exorcist is certainly not without issues, but it did give us one of the greatest and most important horror films in cinema history. I also can't stop thinking about the Paul Bateson case and just how pivotal Arthur Bell was to it. I can't help but wonder if he hadn't published that article, if Paul Bateson would have never come forward, or if it would have simply been another unsolved case. And this is just the stuff surrounding the production. I didn't even cover the true story, or supposed true story, that is the inspiration for William Blatty's novel. Perhaps I'll do an episode on that story another day. If you're new here and found me through this episode, then please do give the video a like and hit that subscribe button so you can join the What the Horror family and so that you don't miss out on any further content. And if you would like to join these names here and get access to extra content every week on top of what you get on this channel, then there is a link to my Patreon page in the description box below. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode.